starting. Okay,
Miss
okay, so call.
Miss Norton?
Aye.
Miss Norton votes aye. Mr. Clay? Mr. Lynch? Aye. Mr. Lynch votes aye. Mr. Cooper? Mr. Connolly? Mr. Krishnamurthy? Aye. Mr. Krishnamurthy votes aye. Mr. Raskin? Mr. Ruda? Ms. Wasserman Schultz?
No.
Mr. Sarbanes? Mr. Welch? Ms. Spear? Ms. Kelly? Mr. Desaulnier? Ms. Lawrence? Ms. Lawrence votes aye. Ms. Plaskett? Mr. Khanna?
Yes.
Mr. Khanna votes aye. Mr. Gomez? Ms. Ocasio-Cortez? Ms. Presley? Ms. Tlaib? Ms. Porter? Ms. Porter votes aye. Ms. Holland? Ms. Holland votes aye. Mr. Jordan? Mr. Gosar? Ms. Fox? Mr. Massey? Mr. Meadows? Mr. Heiss? Mr. Heiss votes no. Mr. Grothman? Mr. Comer? Mr. Comer votes no. Mr. Cloud? Mr. Gibbs? Mr. Gibbs votes no. Mr. Higgins? Mr. Norman? Mr. Roy? Ms. Miller? Ms. Miller votes no. Mr. Green? Mr. Green votes no. Mr. Armstrong? Mr. Stubbe? Mr. Keller? Mr. Keller votes no. You are not recorded.
I vote no.
Mr. Higgins votes no.
And how am I recorded? Heiss.
You are recorded as no.
I'd like to be a yes, please.
Mr. Heiss votes aye.
Madam Chair, how am I recorded?
Ms. Plaskett, you are not recorded.
Plaskett votes aye.
Ms. Plaskett votes aye. Mr. Clay is not recorded. Mr. Clay votes aye.
Madam
Miss-
Chair, oh, sorry.
Ms. Maloney, you are not recorded. Ms. Maloney votes aye.
How am I recorded?
You are not recorded.
I would like to vote aye.
Ms. Ocasio-Cortez votes aye.
How am I recorded?
Mr. Welch is not recorded. Mr. Welch votes aye.
How am I recorded, ma'am?
Mr. Armstrong is not recorded.
No, please.
Mr. Armstrong votes no. You are not recorded. Mr. Gosar votes no. You are not recorded. Mr. Norman votes no.
How am I recorded?
Ms. Wasserman Schultz is not recorded. Ms. Wasserman Schultz votes aye.
How am I recorded?
Mr. Cloud, you are not recorded.
No, please.
Mr. Cloud votes no. Mr. Gomez is not recorded. Mr. Gomez votes aye. Ms. Talib, you are not recorded. Ms. Talib votes yes. Ms. Fox, you are not recorded. Ms. Fox votes no.
How am I recorded?
Mr. Raskin, you are not recorded.
Good, because I didn't vote yet. I vote aye.
Mr. Raskin votes aye.
The clerk shall report the vote. Do you have any more?
Who do you have that I'm missing?
2 more.
Oh, 17.
Hold on. Kelly. How are you, brother? Good. Good to see you. Same here.
What is going on? It's so funny. That's so funny.
Mr. Connolly, you are not recorded. You are not recorded. Mr. Connolly votes aye. Ms. Presley is not recorded. Ms. Presley votes aye. Ms. Kelly is not recorded. Ms. Kelly votes aye.
Good, you? What's going on? This was a long day, man. I missed like 5 flights already.
It's a little long week. This week was over like 48 hours ago.
Yeah.
The clerk will report.
On this vote, we have 20 ayes and 11 noes.
Okay. On this vote, there were 20 ayes and 11 noes. The bill will be reported favorably to the House. The motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The question now occurs on favorably reporting H.R. 2575, the Artificial Intelligence in Government Act as amended to the House, which previously passed by voice vote. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Norton? Ms. Norton votes aye. Mr. Clay? Mr. Clay votes aye. Mr. Lynch? Mr. Lynch votes aye. Mr. Cooper? Mr. Connolly?
Aye.
Mr. Connolly votes aye. Mr. Krishnamurthy?
Aye.
Mr. Krishnamurthy votes aye. Mr. Raskin?
Aye.
Mr. Raskin votes aye. Mr. Ruda? Ms. Wasserman Schultz? Ms. Wasserman Schultz votes aye. Mr. Sarbanes? Mr. Welch? Mr. Welch votes aye. Ms. Spear? Ms. Kelly? Ms. Kelly votes aye. Mr. DeSaulnier? Ms. Lawrence? Ms. Lawrence votes aye. Ms. Plaskett? Ms. Plaskett votes aye. Mr. Khanna? Mr. Khanna votes aye. Mr. Gomez? Mr. Gomez votes aye. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez? Ms. Ocasio-Cortez votes aye. Ms. Presley? Ms. Presley votes aye. Ms. Talib? Ms. Talib votes aye. Ms. Porter? Ms. Porter votes aye. Ms. Holland? Ms. Holland votes aye. Mr. Jordan? Mr. Gosar? Mr. Gosar votes no. Ms. Fox? Ms. Fox votes no. Mr. Massey? Mr. Meadows? Mr. Heiss? Mr. Heiss votes no. Mr. Grothman? Mr. Comer? Mr. Comer votes no. Mr. Cloud? Mr. Cloud votes no. Mr. Gibbs? Mr. Gibbs votes no. Mr. Higgins? Mr. Higgins?
Mr. Higgins votes no.
Mr. Higgins votes no. Mr. Norman? Mr. Norman votes no. Mr. Roy? Ms. Miller? Ms. Miller votes no. Mr. Green? Mr. Green votes aye. Mr. Armstrong? Mr. Armstrong votes no. Mr. Stube? Mr. Keller? Mr. Keller votes no. Ms. Maloney?
Aye.
Ms. Maloney votes aye.
Are there members who wish to vote or change their vote? Mr. Grossman?
Mr. Grothman votes no.
Okay, the clerk shall report the vote.
On this vote, we have 20 ayes and 12 noes.
On this vote, there were 20 ayes and 12 noes. The bill will be reported favorably to the House. The motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Staff is authorized to make any technical and conforming changes. There being no further business, I thank all of my colleagues, wish them happy holidays, and the committee stands adjourned. Happy holidays. Good job. Thanks.